November 14th, 2021. 7:43 p.m. The rain came down like needles that night in Millbrook Valley, a forgotten pocket of rural Pennsylvania where the autumn darkness arrives early and stays long. The kind of place where streetlights are sparse, where the highway cuts through like a scar, and where people know better than to ask too many questions about their neighbor's business. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, cold enough to make your breath visible. Cold enough to numb your fingers if you stayed outside too long. The wind carried the smell of wet decay from the forest that surrounded the town. Pine needles, rotting leaves, and something else. Something metallic and ancient that seemed to seep from the very ground itself. This was mill country once. Back in the 1940s and 50s, Millbrook Valley thrived on textile production. The Riverside Cotton Mill employed nearly 600 workers at its peak, its brick towers rising against the sky like industrial cathedrals. But like so many American mill towns, prosperity didn't last. The work moved overseas. The machines went silent. By 1987, the mill closed its doors for the final time, leaving behind only rust, broken windows, and the hollow promise of what used to be. The building still stands there, a massive corpse of brick and mortar alongside Blackwater Creek, slowly being consumed by kudzu and time. Local teenagers sometimes dared each other to venture inside, though most turned back before reaching the entrance. There were stories, of course, missing vagrants, strange lights in the upper windows, the sound of machinery that shouldn't be running. But in a town of barely 3,000 souls, stories are currency, and truth becomes whatever people need it to be. Jessica Allen didn't believe in ghost stories. She was 34 years old that November evening. A practical woman with auburn hair she kept pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, hazel eyes that crinkled when she smiled, and the kind of quiet strength that comes from raising 2 children largely on your own. Her husband, Marcus Allen, worked long-haul trucking routes that kept him away for weeks at a time. Good money, he'd say. We need good money. So Jessica managed. She worked as a nurse at Millbrook Valley Regional Hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts in the emergency room, where she'd seen every kind of small-town tragedy: car accidents on rain-slicked roads, farming injuries, overdoses from the opioid epidemic that had gutted the community. She had steady hands and a calm voice, the kind of person who could look at chaos and find order within it. Her children, Emma, age 9, and Tyler, age 6, were her entire world. Emma had her mother's auburn hair and her father's stubborn streak, already showing signs of being fiercely independent. Tyler was softer, more sensitive, the kind of boy who brought home injured birds and cried during Disney movies. Jessica documented their lives meticulously: first days of school, birthday parties, soccer games, Halloween costumes. Her phone was filled with photos. Her Facebook page was a monument to ordinary maternal love. She drove a dark blue 2015 Honda CR-V. Practical, reliable, safe, just like Jessica herself. The vehicle had 78,000 miles on it, a small dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot mishap, and a collection of juice boxes and goldfish crackers scattered across the back seat. In the glove compartment, she kept the registration, insurance documents, a small flashlight, and a pocket-sized notebook where she jotted grocery lists and appointment reminders. November 14th, 2021, was supposed to be an ordinary day. Jessica had worked the morning shift at the hospital, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Her friend and co-worker, Linda Perkins, would later recall that Jessica seemed completely normal that day. She was tired, Linda told investigators, but no more than usual. We talked about Tyler's upcoming birthday party. She was planning to make a Superman cake from scratch. She showed me a picture on her phone of what she wanted it to look like. She was excited about it. At 7:43 p.m., Jessica clocked out. Security footage from the hospital parking lot showed her walking to her CR-V, keys in hand, her purple nurse's scrubs visible beneath her black winter coat. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking spot. The camera captured her vehicle turning left onto County Road 47, heading north toward her home on Maple Ridge Drive, a 12-minute journey she'd made thousands of times. She never arrived. Marcus was on a haul to Minneapolis that week. Emma and Tyler were staying with Jessica's mother, Patricia Brennan, who lived just 3 blocks from the Allen residence. Patricia had agreed to watch the children while Jessica worked her shift. When Jessica didn't pick them up by 8:30, Patricia called. The call went to voicemail. She called again at 9, again at 9:30. By 10 p.m., Patricia's concern had crystallized into genuine fear. She drove to Jessica's house. The porch light was off. The front door was locked. The house was empty and dark, holding its breath in the November cold. Patricia called Marcus, though she knew he was halfway across the country. She called the hospital. Jessica had left on time. She called Jessica's cell phone 17 times between 10 p.m. and midnight. Every call went unanswered. At 12:47 a.m. on November 15th, Patricia Brennan walked into the Millbrook Valley Police Department and filed a missing person report. The officer on duty was Deputy Frank Holloway, a 28-year veteran who'd seen his share of false alarms, teenagers running away, adults escaping bad marriages, people who simply needed to disappear for a while. He took Patricia's statement with professional courtesy, but she could see it in his eyes. Give it 24 hours. People turn up. They didn't list Jessica as endangered at first. Adults have the right to vanish if they choose. No evidence of foul play. No signs of struggle. Just a woman who'd driven away from work and never came home. But those who knew Jessica understood immediately that something was terribly wrong. Jessica didn't vanish. She didn't leave her children. She didn't miss work without calling. She was the anchor, the planner, the one who showed up no matter what. Her absence was as unnatural as the sun not rising. The investigation began in earnest when 24 hours became 48, then 72, then a week. Police traced her cell phone records. The device had powered off or died somewhere along County Road 47 at approximately 8:02 p.m., less than 20 minutes after she'd left the hospital parking lot. Ping data placed her last known location roughly 2 miles north of the hospital, near the intersection with Old Mill Road. Search parties combed the route. Volunteers walked the shoulders of County Road 47 in the freezing November rain, looking for any sign of the missing CRV or its driver. They found nothing. Helicopters swept the forested areas with thermal imaging. Nothing. Dive teams searched accessible water sources, the creek, the reservoir, drainage ponds. Nothing. Jessica's face appeared on news broadcasts across Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Her photograph, a smiling woman with kind eyes, taken at Emma's birthday party the previous summer, became ubiquitous. Posters went up on telephone poles and bulletin boards throughout the region. Missing, Jessica Allen, last seen, 11/14/21. Marcus cut his haul short and returned home, his face a mask of bewildered anguish. He gave interview after interview, pleading for information, for his wife's safe return. Jessica, if you're out there, if you can hear this, we love you. Emma and Tyler need you. I need you. Please come home. The theories multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Some believed Jessica had been abducted. Human trafficking was real, even in small towns, and a woman driving alone at night made an easy target. Others whispered about trouble in the marriage, suggesting that Jessica had orchestrated her own disappearance to escape domestic problems. Marcus adamantly denied any marital discord, and friends corroborated that the couple, while stressed by his travel schedule, appeared solid. A darker faction speculated about murder, though without a body or crime scene. This remained pure conjecture. The police investigation hit wall after wall. No witnesses had seen Jessica after she left the hospital. No surveillance cameras existed along that particular stretch of County Road 47. It was rural, isolated, the kind of road where you could drive for 5 minutes without passing another vehicle. Her bank account showed no activity after November 14th. Her cell phone never pinged another tower. It was as if Jessica Allen had simply driven into a void and vanished. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The initial media frenzy faded into sporadic updates, then into silence. The yellow ribbons tied around trees in downtown Millbrook Valley grew weather-beaten and tattered. The community held vigils, but attendance dwindled as hope transformed into resignation. Emma and Tyler moved through their days like small ghosts, asking questions their grandmother couldn't answer. Where's Mom? When is she coming back? Did we do something wrong? Patricia Brennan aged a decade in 6 months. Marcus stopped taking long-haul routes, instead working locally so he could be home with his children, though home had become a mausoleum of memories where Jessica's absence screamed from every room. The Superman cake was never made. By spring 2022, the official investigation had stalled completely. Detective Sarah Moreno of the Pennsylvania State Police, who'd taken over the case from local authorities, maintained regular contact with the family, but she had no leads to pursue. "We've exhausted all conventional avenues," she admitted during a 6-month review meeting with Marcus and Patricia. "Unless new information surfaces, there's nowhere else to look." Summer came and went. Then autumn returned, bringing with it the anniversary of Jessica's disappearance. The local news ran a retrospective piece, 1 year later, What Happened to Jessica Allen. It featured interviews with Patricia, who looked directly into the camera and said, "Someone knows something. Someone out there knows what happened to my daughter." But the phones didn't ring. No tips came in. The case went cold. 18 months passed. And then, on a gray May afternoon in 2023, everything changed. A group of urban explorers, 3 college students from Philadelphia armed with cameras, and a YouTube channel dedicated to documenting abandoned places, decided to visit the old Riverside cotton mill. They'd heard stories about the location, seen photos of the decaying interior, and wanted to capture footage for their channel. They arrived around 3 p.m., parking their car on the crumbling access road that ran behind the mill complex. The area behind the mill was a wasteland of industrial debris, rusted machinery, collapsed outbuildings, mounds of trash, and tall grass that had overtaken everything. Blackwater Creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, its waters dark and sluggish, stained brown from decades of industrial runoff. One of the explorers, a 21-year-old named Derek Simmons, walked toward the creek bank, hoping to get a dramatic angle of the mill reflected in the water. That's when he noticed something strange. About 30 feet from the bank, partially hidden by the tall grass and barely visible above the murky surface, was the top edge of what looked like a vehicle roof. Dark blue metal, catching the gray afternoon light. Derek called to his friends. They pushed through the grass, their footsteps squelching in the marshy ground. As they got closer, the shape became unmistakable, a submerged SUV sitting in approximately 6 feet of water, its roof about 8 inches below the surface. They could see it clearly now, the outline of the vehicle, the subtle shimmer of metal beneath the dark water, the way aquatic plants had begun growing across the hood. It had been there for a long time, long enough for nature to start reclaiming it. One of the students, a young woman named Ashley Chen, felt something cold slide down her spine. "We need to call the police," she said. At 4:17 p.m. on May 16, 2023, Millbrook Valley Police received a call about a submerged vehicle behind the abandoned Riverside cotton mill. By 5 p.m., County Road 47 behind the mill was a circus of emergency vehicles, police cruisers, fire trucks, an ambulance standing by. Detective Sarah Moreno arrived within 40 minutes, her stomach already tight with sick certainty about what they'd found. A dive team went into the water as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The first diver emerged after 12 minutes, water streaming from his wetsuit, and gave a grim nod to the assembled officials. "It's a Honda CR-V, he confirmed. "Dark blue, Pennsylvania plates." Sarah Moreno closed her eyes for just a moment. They pulled the vehicle from Blackwater Creek at 7:23 p.m., using a heavy-duty tow truck and cable winch. The CR-V emerged from the water like a drowned beast, mud and creek debris sliding off its surfaces, water pouring from every gap and seam. The sun had set by then, and portable floodlights illuminated the scene in harsh white light, casting long shadows across the mill's crumbling walls. The license plate was still attached, though covered in silt, KJL 8742. Jessica Allen's vehicle. The driver's side window was down. Not broken, but rolled down. Approximately 4 inches. As if someone had wanted fresh air during a drive. The keys were still in the ignition. A child's car seat remained secured in the back. And on the passenger seat, sealed in a waterproof phone case, was Jessica's cell phone. But Jessica herself was not inside the vehicle. The clock read 8:47 p.m. when they opened the trunk, and what they found there would turn this missing person case into something far darker than anyone had imagined. May 16, 2023. 8:47 p.m. Detective Sarah Moreno had been in law enforcement for 17 years. She'd worked homicides, missing persons, child abuse cases. She'd seen bodies in various states of decomposition, crime scenes that would haunt her dreams, evidence that proved humanity's capacity for darkness. But standing under those portable floodlights, watching the trunk of Jessica Allen's waterlogged CRV swing open with a metallic groan, she felt something shift in her chest. A cold recognition that this case was about to become something else entirely. Inside the trunk, wrapped in layers of heavy-duty plastic sheeting and duct tape, partially decomposed and unrecognizable from 18 months submerged in Blackwater Creek, was a body. But it wasn't Jessica Allen. The medical examiner, Dr. Raymond Cho, arrived at the scene by 9:30 p.m. He was a meticulous man in his late 50s, with silver-rimmed glasses and hands that never trembled, even when examining the most disturbing remains. He worked under the harsh lights while the assembled officers maintained a perimeter, their faces grim, their radios crackling with tense communications. By 11 p.m., Dr. Cho had made preliminary assessments. "Adult male," he announced to Detective Moreno, his voice clinically detached. "Caucasian, approximately 5'9" to 5'11". Age estimation will require laboratory analysis, but based on skeletal development, I'd estimate late 30s to mid-40s. Cause of death uncertain until autopsy, but there are clear indicators of blunt force trauma to the skull." Sarah felt the case fracturing into 1,000 new questions. How long has he been dead? Given the condition of the remains and the preservation effects of cold water, I'd estimate death occurred around the same time this vehicle entered the creek. Roughly 18 months ago. The implications crashed down like a collapsing building. Jessica Allen hadn't just disappeared. She'd been driving a vehicle with a dead man in the trunk. Either she'd put him there, or someone else had, and that someone had made Jessica disappear to cover it up. The mill loomed behind them, its broken windows like empty eye sockets, watching silently as the investigation transformed from a missing person case into a potential homicide. Multiple homicides, perhaps. By midnight, the scene was swarming with forensic technicians. They photographed every inch of the CRV, documented water damage patterns, collected trace evidence from the interior. The vehicle's position in the creek suggested it had entered the water from the access road behind the mill, driven or pushed down a slight embankment directly into Blackwater Creek, where the depth and murky water had kept it hidden for a year and a half. The driver's side window being partially open was significant. It had allowed water to flood the interior relatively quickly, ensuring the vehicle would sink and stay submerged. The keys in the ignition suggested someone had driven it there intentionally. But whose hands had been on that steering wheel? Jessica's or someone else's? Marcus Allen received the call at 1:34 a.m. Detective Moreno drove to his house personally. This wasn't news to deliver over the phone. When Marcus opened the door, still wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, his face registered immediate panic. He'd been living in a state of perpetual anxiety for 18 months, and every late-night knock or unexpected call triggered the same visceral response. They found her body. "We found Jessica's vehicle," Sarah said carefully, watching his reaction. But not Jessica. There was someone else inside. A deceased male. "We need to ask you some questions, Marcus." His face went through a progression of emotions, confusion, horror, disbelief, that looked entirely genuine. "I don't... What? Who?" I don't understand what you're telling me. They sat in his living room, where framed photos of Jessica smiled from every surface, frozen in happier moments. Sarah asked the questions she had to ask. Did Jessica know anyone who matched the preliminary description of the deceased? Had she mentioned any problems, any threats, anyone following her or making her uncomfortable? Had there been any unusual activity in the days before her disappearance? Marcus answered each question with increasing desperation. No, nothing. Jessica lived a normal life. She went to work. She took care of the kids. She talked to her mom. She watched Netflix. There was nothing strange, no one threatening her, no secret life or hidden problems. You have to believe me. We need to identify the body, Sarah explained. We'll be running DNA, dental records, fingerprints if viable. But I need you to think, Marcus. Anyone from Jessica's past? Old boyfriends? Patients from the hospital who might have fixated on her? Anyone at all? He sat there on the couch where he'd once watched television with his wife, his hands gripping his knees, and shook his head slowly. I can't think of anyone. Jessica never mentioned. She would have told me if someone was bothering her. She would have said something. But people keep secrets, even from those they love. Especially from those they love. The autopsy took place the following afternoon at the State Forensic Facility in Harrisburg. Dr. Cho worked with painstaking precision, documenting every injury, every detail that might reveal how this man had died. The blunt force trauma to the skull was severe, multiple impacts suggesting a violent assault. There were also defensive wounds on the hands and forearms, indicating the victim had tried to protect himself. Time of death aligned with Jessica's disappearance. The man had likely died within hours of November 14, 2021. Fingerprint analysis proved impossible. The prolonged submersion had destroyed tissue integrity. But dental records were viable, and by May 18th, they had an identification. The body belonged to Connor Hayes, age 42, a resident of Millbrook Valley. Sarah Moreno felt her blood pressure spike when she saw the name. Connor Hayes. She knew that name. Everyone in the Millbrook Valley Police Department knew that name. Connor Hayes had been reported missing on November 16, 2021, exactly 2 days after Jessica Allen disappeared. He'd lived alone in a small rental house on the south side of town, worked as a maintenance contractor for various properties in the area, and had a criminal record that painted an ugly picture. Assault charges from 2008, pled down to disorderly conduct, a restraining order filed by an ex-girlfriend in 2012, allegations of harassment that never resulted in charges, a DUI in 2015. He was known to local police as someone who existed on the margins of acceptable behavior, not dangerous enough to warrant constant surveillance, but troubling enough to remember. When Connor was reported missing by his landlord, who'd noticed his truck sitting in the driveway untouched for days, his rent unpaid, police had investigated briefly. They'd found his house in disarray, his wallet and phone left behind, no signs of foul play. It looked like he'd simply walked away from his life. Given his history and lifestyle, investigators had assumed he'd gotten into trouble, drug debts, criminal associates, the kind of problems men like Connor often faced. The case had been filed away as a low-priority missing person. No family pushing for answers, no emotional press conferences. Just another troubled man who'd vanished. Now he'd been found in the trunk of Jessica Allen's vehicle, murdered, and suddenly 2 missing person cases had merged into something far more sinister. Detective Moreno began pulling every piece of information available on Connor Hayes. His employment records showed he'd done maintenance work at Millbrook Valley Regional Hospital, Jessica's workplace, on multiple occasions between 2019 and 2021. He'd repaired HVAC systems, fixed plumbing issues, handled various odd jobs around the facility. He'd had access to the hospital, access to areas where staff worked, access potentially to Jessica. Sarah interviewed Jessica's co-workers with renewed urgency. Had anyone noticed Connor paying unusual attention to Jessica? Had there been any interactions that seemed inappropriate or uncomfortable? Linda Perkins, Jessica's friend from the ER, sat across from Sarah in an interview room and slowly, reluctantly, revealed a detail she'd never thought significant before. "There was this maintenance guy," Linda said, her voice quiet. "Maybe 8 or 9 months before Jessica disappeared. He used to come to the ER to fix things, broken equipment, leaky faucets, stuff like that. Jessica mentioned once that he made her uncomfortable, the way he looked at her. He'd find excuses to come by the nurse's station, always when Jessica was working. She said it creeped her out, but she didn't think it was serious enough to report. Just creepy. Did she tell you his name?" Linda shook her head. "She just called him the maintenance creep. I never saw him up close. I couldn't identify him, but hospital employment records confirmed Connor Hayes had been contracted for ER repairs during that exact time frame. He'd been there, he'd seen Jessica, and according to his pattern of behavior with women, he'd likely fixated on her. The investigation shifted into overdrive. Forensic teams descended on Connor Hayes' former residence, now occupied by new tenants, but still holding potential evidence. They tore through the property systematically, searching for any connection to Jessica, any clue about what had happened. In the crawl space beneath the house, buried under 18 months of dust and insulation, they found Connor's personal laptop. The hard drive was intact. The digital forensics team worked through the night, extracting data, recovering deleted files, piecing together Connor Hayes' digital life. What they found made Sarah Moreno's stomach turn. Connor had been stalking Jessica Allen for at least 7 months before her disappearance. Hundreds of photos on his computer, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Jessica leaving the hospital, Jessica pumping gas, Jessica picking up her children from school, Jessica grocery shopping, Jessica in her own home, visible through windows at night. He documented her routines, her schedule, her movements with obsessive precision. There were notes. Rambling, disturbing notes about destiny and connection, and how Jessica needed to understand that they were meant to be together. Evidence of attempts to engineer chance encounters. Records of purchases, duct tape, plastic sheeting, zip ties, sedatives obtained illegally. Connor Hayes had been planning something terrible. And on November 14th, 2021, whatever he'd been planning had gone catastrophically wrong. For him, the timeline began assembling itself. Connor had likely ambushed Jessica somewhere along County Road 47 after she left the hospital that night. Perhaps he'd forced her off the road, or blocked her path, or created some scenario that made her stop. He'd intended to abduct her, to finally act on his obsessive fantasies. But Jessica had fought back. The defensive wounds on Connor's body told part of the story. The blunt force trauma to his skull told the rest. Somewhere in that dark November night, Jessica Allen had killed her would-be abductor in self-defense. And then, in a moment of panic and desperation, she'd done something that defied all logic and understanding. She'd put his body in her trunk, driven to the abandoned mill, and sunk her own vehicle in Blackwater Creek with Connor Hayes inside. And then she'd vanished. But why? If it was self-defense, why not call the police? Why disappear? Why abandon her children, her life, everything she loved? The answer came from an unexpected source. On May 22nd, Patricia Brennan, Jessica's mother, appeared at the police station without an appointment, her face drawn and pale, carrying a shoebox she'd found hidden in the back of Jessica's closet while sorting through her daughter's belongings. She'd been preparing to box up Jessica's clothes, to donate them, to finally accept that her daughter might never return. Inside the shoebox were letters. 23 letters to be precise, written on plain white paper in Jessica's distinctive handwriting. They were dated across a span of years from 2006 to 2019, and they told a story that shattered everything Patricia thought she knew about her daughter's life. Jessica had been in an abusive relationship before Marcus. A relationship she'd never told anyone about, not her mother, not her friends, not even Marcus after they'd married. His name was Cole Brennan, no relation to Patricia despite the shared surname, and he'd controlled, manipulated, and violently abused Jessica for 3 years before she finally escaped. The letters documented everything: the beatings, the psychological torture, the death threats, the time he'd held a gun to her head and promised to kill her if she ever left. Jessica had written these letters as a form of therapy, a way to process her trauma, evidence she'd kept in case Cole ever found her again. And the final letter, dated March 2019, contained a chilling sentence. "Cole is out of prison. He knows where I am. I saw him watching the house last week. I'm terrified he'll find me. I'm terrified of what he'll do. If anything happens to me, he did it." Sarah Moreno felt the pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. She ran Cole Brennan's name through every database available: criminal history, aggravated assault, stalking, terroristic threats. He'd served 4 years in state prison from 2015 to 2019, released on parole in March 2019, exactly when Jessica's last letter was written, and his parole records showed his last known address as a halfway house in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, less than 90 miles from Millbrook Valley. Cole Brennan had been watching Jessica. And when Jessica killed Connor Hayes in self-defense that November night, she'd faced an impossible choice. Call the police, and her name would be everywhere. News coverage, public records, a trial, even if justified. Her face and location broadcast across every media outlet. Cole would see. Cole would know exactly where she was. And Cole had promised, years ago with his hands around her throat, that he would kill her if she ever tried to escape him. So Jessica had done the only thing she thought would keep her children safe. She'd disposed of Connor Hayes' body, abandoned her vehicle, and disappeared completely, hoping that if everyone believed she was dead or simply gone, Cole would never find her. She'd chosen to become a ghost rather than risk leading a monster to her family. The question now was simple and terrible. Where was Jessica Allen? And was Cole Brennan the reason she was still missing? May 28th, 2023. 6:15 a.m. The manhunt for Cole Brennan began at dawn, coordinated across 3 states with the kind of intensity reserved for the most dangerous fugitives. Detective Sarah Moreno had spent the past 6 days constructing a profile of Cole that painted a picture of calculated violence and obsessive control. He was 47 years old, 6 feet tall, approximately 210 pounds, with a snake tattoo coiling up his left forearm and a criminal history that documented his escalating pattern of violence against women. His parole officer in Harrisburg reported that Cole had stopped checking in 4 months ago, February 2023. An arrest warrant had been issued for parole violation, but he'd vanished into the wind, leaving no digital footprint, no paper trail, no indication of where he'd gone. Men like Cole knew how to disappear when they wanted to. They understood how to move through the cracks in society, how to stay invisible while hunting their prey. Sarah had a theory she couldn't shake. Cole had found Jessica somehow, despite her precautions. And the discovery of the CRV, the media coverage that followed, had triggered something. If Jessica was alive and hiding, the news that her vehicle had been found would force her to make a decision. And Cole would be watching for exactly that moment. The breakthrough came from an unexpected angle. A clerk at a rural gas station in Clearfield County, about 40 miles north of Millbrook Valley, called the tip line after seeing Cole Brennan's photo on the news. "That guy was here 3 weeks ago," the clerk said, his voice uncertain. "I remember because he was asking weird questions about the old logging camps up in the state forest. Wanted to know which ones were still standing, which roads were accessible. Gave me a bad feeling." State police mobilized immediately. The logging camps dated back to the 1930s and 40s, remnants of Pennsylvania's timber industry. Small clusters of cabins and structures scattered throughout thousands of acres of dense forest. Most had collapsed into ruin decades ago, but some remained standing, hidden deep in the woods, accessible only by overgrown logging roads that hadn't seen vehicles in years. They were perfect places to hide, perfect places to keep someone prisoner. The search teams deployed into Sproul State Forest at first light on May 29th. Helicopters swept overhead with thermal imaging while ground units pushed through the undergrowth, following old maps and GPS coordinates to each known logging camp location. The forest was vast and unforgiving. 60,000 acres of steep terrain, thick laurel, and shadows that seemed to swallow light. By noon, they'd searched 8 locations. Nothing. By 4 p.m., 14 locations. Still nothing. Sarah drove up from Millbrook Valley, unable to stay away from the search. She stood at the forward command post, a parking area where the Forest Service road terminated, and studied topographical maps with growing frustration. Cole could be anywhere out here. And if he had Jessica, if she was still alive after all this time, every passing hour decreased her chances of survival. At 6:47 p.m., one of the search teams radioed in. "We've got something at coordinates 41.2456, 77.8934. Old logging camp, 4 structures still standing, fresh tire tracks on the access road. Recent activity, requesting backup before approach." Sarah's heart rate spiked. She grabbed her radio. "Hold position. We're coming to you. Do not approach alone." The drive to the coordinates took 23 minutes, navigating treacherous forest roads in the fading daylight. When they arrived, tactical units were already establishing a perimeter around the logging camp, moving with practiced silence through the trees. Through the foliage, Sarah could see the structures, rough wooden cabins, weathered and gray, surrounded by tall grass and abandoned machinery slowly being consumed by rust and vegetation. And parked behind one of the cabins, partially covered with a camouflage tarp, was a dark green pickup truck. The license plate ran back to a vehicle reported stolen from a Home Depot parking lot in Harrisburg 3 months ago. Cole Brennan's truck. The tactical commander made the call signs, and the team moved in with precision, weapons drawn, voices announcing police in sharp, authoritative tones that echoed through the forest. They breached the main cabin first, flashlights cutting through the gloom of the interior. Empty. Second cabin. Empty. Third cabin, and Sarah heard someone shout, "Clear!" followed by, "We need medical! Now!" Sarah ran toward the cabin, her legs pumping, branches whipping at her face. She burst through the doorway and stopped, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The cabin was one room, maybe 12 by 15 feet. Plywood covered the windows from the inside, blocking natural light. A camping lantern provided weak illumination. There was a cot against one wall, a chemical toilet in the corner, supplies stacked on makeshift shelves, canned food, bottled water, batteries. And on the cot, wrapped in blankets, barely conscious, was Jessica Allen. She was alive. 18 months. 18 months of captivity in this forest prison, and she'd survived. The paramedics worked quickly, checking vital signs, starting an IV, preparing her for transport. Jessica's auburn hair was long and unkempt, her face gaunt, her body thin from inadequate nutrition, but her hazel eyes were open and aware, tracking the movement around her with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Sarah knelt beside the cot, her professional composure cracking. "Jessica, I'm Detective Sarah Moreno. You're safe now. You're safe. We're going to get you out of here." Jessica's lips moved, her voice barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse. "My children. Are my children safe?" "They're safe," Sarah promised, tears burning her eyes. "Emma and Tyler are safe. Your mother has them. They're safe." Jessica closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. But even as the paramedics loaded Jessica onto a stretcher and began carrying her toward the waiting ambulances, the tactical team was searching the remaining cabin, and what they found there explained everything. Cole Brennan's body was in the 4th cabin, slumped against the wall, dead for approximately 3 days based on decomposition. The medical examiner would later confirm cause of death: massive internal bleeding from a ruptured stomach ulcer, exacerbated by heavy alcohol use and refusal to seek medical treatment. Cole had died slowly and painfully, alone in the forest with his prisoner just meters away. And Jessica, locked in her cabin, too weak to break through the plywood-covered windows, her voice too damaged from screaming for help to carry through the dense forest, had been trapped there with her captor's corpse rotting in the adjacent structure, not knowing he was dead, still terrified he would come through the door at any moment. The full story emerged over the following days, pieced together from Jessica's testimony, forensic evidence, and the journals Cole had kept documenting his obsession. On November 14, 2021, after Jessica left the hospital, Connor Hayes had forced her off County Road 47 using his truck to block the road. He'd approached her vehicle with zip ties and duct tape, intending to abduct her. But Jessica had grabbed the tire iron she kept in her vehicle for emergencies, and when Connor reached through her partially open window to unlock the door, she'd struck him repeatedly in desperate self-defense until he stopped moving. The realization of what she'd done, that she'd killed someone, even in self-defense, had sent Jessica into shock and panic. But worse than that was the immediate understanding that publicity would follow. Police investigation, media coverage. Her name and face everywhere. Cole would see. Cole, who'd promised to kill her. Cole, who'd already found her once before, in 2019. Watching her house before disappearing again. Cole, who would use any information about her to track her down and finally make good on his threats. So Jessica had made an impossible choice. She'd loaded Connor's body into her trunk, adrenaline providing strength she didn't know she possessed, and driven to the old mill, a location she knew from childhood explorations. She'd guided her CRV down the embankment into Blackwater Creek, taking with her the evidence of Connor Hayes' death. The partially open window allowed water to flood in quickly, ensuring the vehicle would sink. Then she'd climbed out, waded to shore in the freezing November water, and begun walking. Her plan was to disappear completely, to become legally dead, or presumed dead, to protect her children from Cole's reach by ensuring he could never use her to threaten them. She'd made it approximately 7 miles, hypothermic and disoriented, before Cole found her on a service road in the pre-dawn hours of November 15th. He'd been watching her for weeks, waiting for an opportunity. Her disheveled, desperate state that night had made her easy prey. Cole had taken Jessica to the logging camp he'd discovered months earlier while planning his move. He'd stocked it with supplies, prepared it like a prison, and kept her there for 18 months. He'd told her repeatedly that if she tried to escape, if anyone came looking, he would kill Emma and Tyler, 9 and 6 years old, their addresses and schools carefully documented in his journals. He would kill her mother. He would kill everyone she loved and make her watch first. So Jessica had stayed, survived, and waited. Waited for a moment that never came, until Cole's own body betrayed him, and the ulcer he'd been ignoring for months finally ruptured, killing him slowly over the course of 3 days, while Jessica listened to his agonized screams from the adjacent cabin, uncertain whether it was a trick, too terrified to call out or try to escape. The urban explorers who'd found the CRV had saved her life. The media coverage that followed had prompted the clerk to call in the tip. The search that resulted had found Jessica with perhaps days to spare before dehydration and starvation would have killed her. On June 2, 2023, Jessica Allen was reunited with her children in a private room at Millbrook Valley Regional Hospital, the same hospital where she'd worked, the same place she'd clocked out 18 months earlier expecting an ordinary drive home. Emma was 11 now, Tyler was 8, and they collapsed into their mother's arms with the kind of desperate love that required no words. Marcus stood in the doorway, tears streaming down his face, watching his family knit itself back together from pieces he'd thought were lost forever. The district attorney declined to file charges related to Connor Hayes' death after reviewing all evidence: clear-cut self-defense, justified force, a woman protecting herself from an attempted abduction. Jessica had made catastrophically poor decisions in the panic that followed, but the trauma of her past abuse explained her reasoning, even if it couldn't excuse the anguish her disappearance had caused. Patricia Brennan told reporters gathered outside the hospital, "My daughter is the strongest person I know. She survived 18 months of hell to stay alive for her children. She's a fighter. She's always been a fighter." The mill still stands beside Blackwater Creek, its windows still broken, its walls still crumbling. But the stories told about it now include a new chapter, about the vehicle that emerged from the water like evidence of some dark baptism, about the secrets it carried, about how the truth sometimes hides in the places we're most afraid to look. Jessica returned to nursing eventually, though she transferred to a different hospital in a different town. She changed her name legally, moved to a location that remains undisclosed, and began the long process of rebuilding a life that had been shattered and slowly, painfully, pieced back together. Some cases end with justice, some end with closure, some end with bodies in the ground and questions that will never be answered. This one ended with a woman who'd been buried alive by circumstance, who dug herself out through sheer force of will, and who walked back into the light carrying scars that would never fully heal, but holding the hands of the children she'd fought so hard to protect. The mystery of Jessica Allen's disappearance was solved. But the trauma it left behind would echo through generations, a reminder that sometimes the darkest prisons have no bars, only the shadows we build ourselves, and the monsters we'd do anything to escape. The end